She once believed brilliant ideas could change the world. But in that fluorescent-lit boardroom filled with smirking faces, all she received was betrayal. A knife thrust straight through her faith. They laughed. They destroyed. And they thought she'd never rise again to return every single blow. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Because while they celebrated her downfall over champagne and stolen dreams, she was already planning their destruction. One by one. Methodically. Mercilessly. My name is Madeline Ross, and I used to believe in the American dream. 32 years old, MBA from Northwestern. 7 years climbing the ladder at Viridian Dynamics. I had every checkbox marked for success in Chicago's cutthroat tech scene. As project director for strategic initiatives, I commanded a corner office on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower, where Lake Michigan stretched endlessly beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. On clear days, I could see all the way to Indiana. On cloudy ones, the city disappeared into mist, much like how quickly loyalty evaporates in corporate America. Viridian Dynamics wasn't just another tech company, it was a predator dressed in Silicon Valley casual wear and startup buzzwords. We specialized in disrupting healthcare through innovative solutions. Corporates speak for squeezing every penny from hospitals while promising them digital transformation. The company culture praised itself on being a family. But families don't typically cannibalize their young for quarterly earnings. The executive floor hummed with barely contained ambition. Every smile concealed a dagger. Every compliment carried poison. I learned this game early, or so I thought. My immediate superior, Richard Halberd, Senior Vice President of Innovation, was a master at it. Silver-haired, perpetually tan from his Scottsdale golf weekends, he could destroy careers with the same casual ease most people ordered coffee. Madeline, he'd say, his Boston accent making my name sound like an accusation. In this business, you're either the knife or the meat. Choose wisely. Then there was Ethan Caldwell, my supposed ally. We'd started at Viridian the same year, suffered through the same brutal onboarding, celebrated our first promotions over overpriced martinis at the Violet Hour. Ethan had that dangerous combination of Ivy League credentials and Midwest charm. Harvard Business School wrapped in Cubs jerseys and craft beer knowledge. Women in the office found him irresistible. I found him useful. Or I thought I did. Trust, I would learn, was the most expensive mistake I'd ever make. The others blurred together in a parade of ambition and anxiety. Sarah Martinez from Business Development, who stress-ate almonds and pitched ideas like machine gun fire. David Park from Engineering. Brilliant but politically naive. Always one meeting away from saying something career-ending. Jennifer Walsh from Legal, who documented everything and trusted no one, the smartest of us all. In retrospect, our office culture thrived on paranoia disguised as collaboration. Open floor plans meant nowhere to hide. Glass conference rooms ensured every failure was public theater. The company's internal social network, meant to foster transparency and connection, became a battlefield where passive-aggressive comments masqueraded as constructive feedback. We had meditation rooms that no one used, afraid of appearing weak. We had team-building exercises that only taught us who to fear. Friday evenings were the worst. That's when Richard held his informal leadership gatherings, mandatory fun where careers lived or died over small talk and single malt. Miss one, and you'd find yourself mysteriously excluded from critical email chains. Attend them all, and you'd slowly poison yourself with the constant performance, the careful calculation of every word, every laugh, every strategic agreement with Richard's increasingly absurd proclamations about market dominance. I survived by being smarter, faster, more ruthless than anyone expected from someone who looked like me. They saw the designer dresses, the Louboutin heels, the perfect blonde highlights maintained religiously every 6 weeks. They didn't see the 16-hour days, the sacrificed relationships, the nights I fell asleep at my desk running financial models until the numbers blurred. They didn't see the real me. But that was about to change. Everything was about to change. The idea came to me during my mother's chemotherapy session. I sat in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, watching her sleep while poison dripped into her veins at $10,000 per dose, and realized how broken everything was. The nurses couldn't access her records from her previous hospital. Her oncologist had to call 3 departments to verify insurance coverage. The billing system crashed twice during our visit. That's when it crystallized, an AI-integrated platform that would revolutionize healthcare administration, connecting every aspect of patient care seamlessly. For 6 months, I became a ghost in my own life. My apartment in Lincoln Park transformed into a war room. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with algorithms, user interface designs, market analysis. I taught myself Python, studied machine learning models until my eyes burned, interviewed dozens of healthcare professionals under NDAs. Weekends disappeared. Friends stopped calling after too many declined invitations. My relationship with Marcus, a trader at the Chicago Board of Trade, died a quiet death over unanswered texts and broken dinner plans. But I didn't care. This was bigger than dinner dates or Sunday brunches. This was my masterpiece. I called it MedConnect AI. Not the most creative name, but in corporate America. Boring names sell better than clever ones. The platform would reduce administrative costs by 40%, eliminate medication errors through predictive analysis, and create seamless communication between providers, insurers, and patients. I built a working prototype using my savings, maxing out credit cards I'd kept for emergencies. $20,000 of my own money, because I wanted to own this completely. Ethan was the first to notice my transformation. "You look tired, Maddie," he said one morning, setting a latte on my desk. His concern seemed genuine, those green eyes radiating warmth. "You're pushing too hard. Whatever you're working on, maybe I could help." I should have heard the hunger in his voice, should have noticed how his questions grew more specific, more probing. But isolation makes you vulnerable, and I was drowning in code and coffee, desperate for someone who understood the technical aspects. So I let him in, just a little, showed him basic frameworks, discussed theoretical applications, never the full picture. But enough. Enough for him to understand the potential. Enough for him to betray me. Richard's interest came next. During a leadership meeting about quarterly innovations, I mentioned working on something revolutionary. His eyes sharpened like a hawk spotting prey. "Madeline, you know Viridian values transparency. Any personal projects using knowledge gained here should be disclosed immediately." The threat was subtle but clear. Either bring the project in-house or risk legal action for potential intellectual property violations. I had 2 choices: surrender my baby or fight for it within the system. I chose to fight. I spent 3 weeks preparing the most comprehensive pitch deck of my life. 60 slides of perfection, every objection anticipated, every financial projection bulletproof. I practiced in my bathroom mirror until I could deliver it in my sleep. The demo ran flawlessly on my personal servers, showcasing real-time integration with anonymous hospital data I'd legally acquired. Ethan offered to review my presentation. "Just to make sure it's perfect," he said, that boyish smile masking intentions I was too exhausted to see. We spent an entire Sunday in the office, going through each slide. He suggested minor adjustments, nothing significant. Asked detailed questions about the back-end architecture. Even helped me optimize some database queries. "This is going to change everything. Maddie," he said as we packed up that night. "You're going to be a legend." The words felt like prophecy then. Now I know they were a eulogy. The pitch was scheduled for October 15th, a Tuesday that started with unexpected sunshine breaking through weeks of gray Chicago autumn. I wore my best suit, charcoal Armani, the one I'd bought after my first promotion, saving for 3 months to afford it. My presentation materials were loaded on 3 separate devices, with cloud backups. Every contingency planned for, except for the one where the person I trusted most had already sold me out. Sarah from business development caught me in the elevator that morning. "Heard you're presenting something big today," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Richard's been in meetings all morning, Ethan too. The elevator felt smaller suddenly, the air thinner. But I pushed the feeling down. Paranoia was a luxury I couldn't afford 3 hours before the biggest moment of my career. I should have listened to my instincts, should have recognized the setup. But ambition makes you blind. And I walked into that conference room believing I was about to change the world. The conference room was packed. Every senior executive, board members dialing in from New York, even employees from other departments crowding in the back. Richard had turned my pitch into a spectacle. Madeline has something revolutionary to show us, he'd announced in the company-wide email. Something that could define Viridian's next decade. I should have known then. Richard never shared spotlights unless he was setting up an execution. Good morning, everyone, I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Today, I'm presenting MedConnect AI, a platform that will transform healthcare administration as we know it. The first 10 minutes went perfectly. Heads nodded at the problem statement. Eyes widened at the market opportunity. A projected $60 billion sector by 2027. Even Richard leaned forward when I showed the cost reduction analysis. Then came time for the live demonstration. I'll now show you the working prototype, I announced, clicking to share my screen. This demonstration uses real anonymized hospital data to showcase the platform's capabilities. The loading screen appeared, then nothing. Error messages cascaded across the display like digital dominoes. Database connection failed, API timeout, critical system failure. The prototype I'd tested 30 minutes ago was dying in front of 50 witnesses. Technical difficulties, I said, forcing a smile while my fingers flew across the keyboard. Let me switch to the backup server. The backup was corrupted, files that had worked perfectly yesterday now threw syntax errors. My third device wouldn't even connect to the network. Sweat gathered at my hairline as whispers started rippling through the room. Ethan stood up. Maybe I can help. Maddie. He moved to the front, all concerned colleague performance. His fingers touched my laptop for exactly 3 seconds before he shook his head. Looks like a fundamental architecture problem. The entire codebase might be compromised. That's impossible, I said, but my voice cracked. This worked perfectly yesterday. You saw it work. Did I? Ethan's confusion seemed genuine enough to win an Oscar. I remember seeing slides, some preliminary code, but a working system? Maddie, are you sure you're not confusing preparation with actual functionality? The room shifted, skepticism replacing anticipation. Richard's expression morphed from interest to disappointment, then to something worse. Pity mixed with contempt. Ms. Ross, he said, using my last name like a verdict. Are you telling us you've brought 50 people here to see a prototype that doesn't exist? It exists. Someone sabotaged. I stopped. Claiming sabotage without proof would sound desperate, paranoid, exactly what they wanted. Richard stood slowly, each movement calculated for maximum impact. This is deeply concerning, not just the waste of time and resources, but the judgment issues. Presenting vaporware as revolutionary technology? That's not the Viridian way. If I may, Ethan interjected, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I've been worried about Madeline lately. The stress, the isolation. Maybe she needs some time off. Sometimes we want something so badly we convince ourselves it's real. The gaslighting was masterful. He'd positioned himself as the caring colleague while painting me as delusional. Jennifer from legal was already taking notes. Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. David Park looked genuinely confused, probably wondering if he'd missed signs of my supposed breakdown. The code exists, I insisted, pulling up my GitHub repository on my phone. But it was empty. Every commit, every branch, deleted. My cloud backups showed nothing but corrupted files, timestamps indicating they'd been that way for weeks. Madeline. Richard's voice carried false concern that fooled everyone but me. We've all been under pressure. Sometimes our minds create what we wish existed. But presenting fantasy as reality, that's dangerous. It makes me question your other projects, your judgment, your fitness for leadership. Board members were already disconnecting from the video call. Employees filed out, avoiding eye contact. The execution was complete, surgical, perfect. But then Richard made his mistake. He smiled. Just for a second. Just for me. A flash of triumph that confirmed everything. "Take the week off," he said loudly, performance resuming. "HR will discuss next steps when you return." Ethan squeezed my shoulder as he passed. "If you need to talk, I'm here," he whispered, and I could hear the laughter underneath his concern. I stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by my failed presentation materials, watching Lake Michigan through the windows. The city continued below, indifferent to the professional murder that had just occurred 42 floors above. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your personal email. A friend." The email contained a single video file, security footage from Sunday night, timestamp showing 2:47 a.m. Ethan at my desk, USB drive in hand, typing on my computer. The video was only 30 seconds, but it was enough. Proof he'd accessed my system after I'd left. But who'd sent it, and why now, after the damage was done? I forwarded the video to my personal attorney, then walked to my office to pack. Security would probably escort me out within the hour. But as I placed my MIT diploma in a banker's box, I wasn't thinking about the humiliation or the lost opportunity. I was thinking about revenge, and unlike my prototype, that was something I knew how to build from scratch. The termination letter arrived 3 days later via courier, signed by Richard himself. Gross misconduct, misrepresentation of company resources, violation of trust, corporate poetry designed to ensure I'd never work in tech again. Within hours, the story spread through Chicago's startup community like digital wildfire. LinkedIn connections evaporated. Recruiters stopped returning calls. My carefully cultivated professional network collapsed in real time. The leaked emails started appearing on industry blogs that afternoon. Screenshots of messages I'd never sent, claiming credit for others' work, bad-mouthing colleagues, discussing my mental health struggles. The forgeries were good enough to fool casual observers. The damage was surgical, comprehensive, designed to salt the earth of my career. I sat in my Lincoln Park apartment, watching my professional death unfold on multiple screens. Twitter threads dissected my breakdown. Reddit's tech forums performed amateur psychoanalysis. Someone had even created a meme from my corporate headshot. "When you promise disruption but deliver delusion." It had 12,000 upvotes by midnight. My mother called from her hospital bed, voice weak but worried. "Sweetheart, Marcus called me. He says people are saying terrible things online." Marcus, my ex who worked in financial services, where gossip traveled faster than high-frequency trades. Even he was distance-checking through my cancer-stricken mother rather than calling directly. The cowardice was almost impressive. "It's being handled, Mom." I lied, staring at my empty bank account. The legal fees for fighting this would destroy me, and Viridian's lawyers knew it. Focus on getting better. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake replaying every moment, searching for missed signals. When had Ethan decided to betray me? Was it that Sunday night, or had he been planning this for months? The uncertainty ate at me like acid. By day 4, I'd stopped eating. By day 7, I'd stopped leaving the apartment. Groceries piled up outside my door, ordered but never retrieved. Friends' texts went unread, then stopped coming altogether. The only constants were rage and the growing certainty that everyone involved had severely underestimated me. The lowest point came on day 10. An eviction notice appeared under my door. Apparently, Viridian had been subsidizing my apartment as part of my compensation package. I had 30 days to leave. My credit cards were maxed from the prototype development. My savings were gone. My industry reputation was destroyed. I sat on my bathroom floor, designer suit crumpled around me, and contemplated the unthinkable. Then the rage saved me. Not hot rage, that burns out quickly. This was cold, patient, crystallizing into something harder than diamonds. They hadn't just taken my job or my idea, They'd tried to erase me, but erasure only works if the erased cooperates by disappearing. I stood up, showered, put on jeans and a sweater, clothes they'd never seen me wear. Then I started planning. The first step was accepting the death of Madeline Ross, rising star. She was gone, murdered in that conference room. What remained was someone else. Someone who understood that corporate warfare required guerrilla tactics. I found a studio apartment in Pilsen, paid cash using the last of my emergency fund. No lease in my name. Just a handshake deal with a landlord who didn't ask questions. I sold everything that screamed successful professional. The designer clothes, the jewelry, the furniture. My Armani suit went for $2,000 to a consignment shop in the Gold Coast. The owner didn't recognize me, even though we'd chatted at charity events. Career change, I told her, and she laughed about tech burnout while counting bills. The money bought me time and anonymity. I dyed my hair dark brown, traded contacts for thick-framed glasses, disappeared into the city's background. The transformation was more than cosmetic. I was shedding the skin of someone who'd believed in meritocracy and fair play. At the public library, I researched Viridian's corporate structure, downloading every public filing, every earnings call transcript. I mapped their vulnerabilities like a general studying enemy positions. Their IPO was scheduled for next spring. Their biggest client contracts were up for renewal in January. Their code of conduct made specific promises about ethical practices that I knew. From inside knowledge were elaborate fiction. But information without leverage was just trivia. I needed allies, evidence, and most importantly, I needed them to believe I was beaten. So I gave them what they expected. A former colleague spotted me at a Starbucks, dressed down, reading job listings. I let her see me cry into my coffee. The story spread exactly as predicted. Madeline Ross is destroyed, applying for entry-level positions, completely broken. Richard probably celebrated. Ethan definitely did. His Instagram showed champagne at the Peninsula Chicago. Caption: Celebrating New Horizons. Let them celebrate. Let them think they'd won. Every moment of their comfort was borrowed against a debt they didn't know they'd accumulated. In my Pilsen studio, surrounded by printed emails, recorded conversations I'd secretly saved, and a growing web of connections on my wall. I was anything but broken. I was becoming something they'd never prepared for. Patient, invisible, and absolutely ruthless. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The breakthrough came from David Park, though he didn't know it. I found him at 2 a.m. in an all-night diner in Chinatown, staring at his laptop with the hollow eyes of someone whose idealism had just died. He'd been fired that afternoon, Richard's latest sacrifice to the quarterly numbers. Madeline? He barely recognized me with dark hair and glasses. I heard you. I mean, everyone said. That I lost my mind? I slid into the booth across from him. Same thing they're saying about you now, I bet. Something about inappropriate conduct with an intern. His face crumbled. She doesn't even exist. They fabricated an entire person, created emails, timestamps. HR wouldn't even let me defend myself. Richard's playbook, I said, signaling for coffee. Page 1, destroy credibility. Page 2, ensure silence through humiliation. Page 3, profit from the stolen remains. We talked until sunrise, 2 casualties comparing wounds. David had something I needed, access logs showing Ethan entering the building at 2:43 a.m. that Sunday, 4 minutes before the security footage I'd received. But more importantly, David had been documenting everything for months, paranoid about exactly this scenario. I have recordings, he whispered, glancing around the empty diner. Conference calls where Richard explicitly discussed fabricating performance reviews. Emails about the disposal protocol for problematic employees. I thought I was being paranoid. Paranoid is just another word for prepared, I said. How many others has he done this to? The list was longer than I'd imagined. Sarah Martinez, forced out after questioning budget irregularities. Jennifer Walsh, resigned after her confidential mental health disclosure became office gossip. At least a dozen others over 3 years, all with their careers systematically destroyed for crossing Richard or knowing too much. We could go to the press, David suggested. No, the press gets a 2-day story. Richard gets a slap on the wrist, and we get lawsuits we can't afford. We need something bigger. That's when I told him about the IPO, about the due diligence that would happen, about how certain disclosures, timed perfectly, could destroy not just careers but the entire company valuation. You want to tank Viridian? David's eyes widened. I want to reveal Viridian. There's a difference. We became architects of truth, building our case file by file. David reached out carefully to other casualties, using encrypted messaging apps, meeting in person like Cold War spies. Sarah Martinez had kept copies of the real financial records, showing discrepancies worth millions. Jennifer Walsh, beautiful Jennifer who'd learned to document everything, had recordings of Richard explicitly ordering illegal activities. My Pilsen studio transformed into a war room. Every wall covered with timelines, connection charts, evidence chains. I lived on ramen and rage, sleeping 3 hours a night, driven by something beyond revenge, a need for cosmic justice. The network grew. A junior developer still at Viridian, disgusted by what he'd witnessed, became our inside eyes. He fed us real-time intelligence. Richard was nervous about something, conducting unusual meetings with legal. Ethan had been promoted to my position, was already pitching his healthcare platform to investors. That hurt more than expected. My idea, built from my mother's suffering, now being perverted into Ethan's golden ticket. But pain was just fuel now, refined into strategic planning. We needed one more thing: irrefutable evidence of the systematic fraud, the smoking gun that would make everything else impossible to dismiss. It came from the most unexpected source. The anonymous friend who'd sent the original security footage reached out again. This time, a physical package to a P.O. box I'd rented under an alias. Inside, a USB drive containing Viridian's entire internal communication archive for the past 5 years, terabytes of emails, chat logs, recorded video conferences, everything. The note was simple. Some of us still believe in justice. Use this wisely. IT department. I spent 72 hours straight parsing the data, living on coffee and determination. What I found exceeded my darkest assumptions: client fraud, investor deception, systematic destruction of employees who asked questions. Richard and the board had built a criminal enterprise disguised as innovation. But the crown jewel was a recorded board meeting from 6 months ago. Richard, clearly drunk on his own power, explicitly describing the elimination protocol for employees who knew too much. He mentioned me by name as a future target if I ever got too ambitious with that healthcare thing. They'd planned my destruction before I'd even had the idea fully formed. I sat back in my cheap desk chair, staring at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice for everyone they'd destroyed, everyone they would destroy if left unchecked. The IPO roadshow was starting in 8 weeks. Investors would be watching, regulators would be paying attention, and the media would be hungry for stories. I opened a new document and began typing. An open letter to Viridian Dynamics. Investors, what you're really buying into. 8 weeks to organize the evidence, coordinate the revelations, and ensure everything dropped at the perfect moment for maximum impact. Ethan was probably in my old office right now, feet on my desk, planning his future with my stolen idea. Let him plan. I was planning too. The first crack in our plan came from within. Marcus Hoffman, not my ex, but one of our allied former employees, got cold feet and tried to negotiate his own deal with Viridian. He'd been documenting Richard's insider trading, but greed overcame principle. He thought he could sell his silence back to them. They found him in his apartment 3 days later. Apparent suicide, the papers said. 2 Xanax prescriptions he'd never filled. A resignation letter he'd never written. The message was clear. We weren't playing a corporate game anymore. This was war. We should stop, David said, hands shaking as we met in a crowded food court at Water Tower Place. Public spaces felt safer now. Marcus is dead, actually dead. Marcus was stupid, I said, though my voice was steadier than my pulse. He went alone, tried to profit. We're not blackmailing anyone, we're exposing truth. But paranoia crept in like Chicago winter wind. I changed apartments twice in 3 weeks, paying cash, using different aliases. Every van parked too long became surveillance. Every stranger's glance carried threat. The stress manifested physically: 10 pounds lost, hair falling out in clumps, hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Then Jennifer Walsh disappeared, not dead, worse. Complete digital erasure and a new job in Singapore that she'd never applied for. With an ironclad NDA that meant instant litigation if she ever mentioned Viridian again. Her encrypted messages stopped mid-sentence, her phone was disconnected, even her LinkedIn vanished. They know, Sarah said when we met at Navy Pier, tourists providing cover. Someone talked, they're hunting us. The smart move was to run, disappear like Jennifer, salvage what remained of our lives. But I thought about my mother, still fighting cancer while dealing with insurance companies that didn't care. About David's family, who'd mortgaged their house to pay for his legal defense. About the junior employees still trapped inside Viridian's machinery, waiting to be ground up for profit. We accelerate, I decided. IPO roadshow starts in 2 weeks. We go early, before they expect it. It was riskier, sloppier than planned. But waiting meant more casualties. That night, I sent encrypted packages to 5 journalists, 3 SEC investigators, and 2 FBI contacts David had cultivated, everything we had, with instructions to open Monday morning, Sunday night. My phone exploded with calls. Richard, from his personal cell. Madeline, let's discuss this rationally. Whatever you think you have, we can work this out. I didn't answer, but saved the voicemail. Evidence he knew what was coming. Ethan texted at 3 a.m. You're making a mistake. Think about your mother. Medical bills are expensive. The threat was naked now. But I'd moved my mother to a different hospital under Medicare only. No private insurance they could manipulate. Every vulnerability had been buttoned up. Every leverage point removed. At 6 a.m. Monday, I sat in a 24-hour McDonald's watching my phone as the packages opened. The first story broke at 6:47 a.m. on TechCrunch. Viridian Dynamics insider trading scandal. Evidence suggests systematic fraud. By 7:15, Bloomberg picked it up. By 8, CNBC was running breaking news banners. The stock market opened with Viridian's largest investor dropping 12%. Richard called again. This time I answered. You stupid bitch, he snarled, all pretense gone. You think you've won? I'll destroy you, sue you into oblivion. You'll never... Check your email. I interrupted. I'd sent him one file. The board meeting recording where he'd outlined my planned destruction. Where he'd laughed about that ambitious little bitch who thinks she's smarter than us. Where he'd explicitly discussed illegal activities with full board knowledge. The silence stretched 30 seconds. Then, what do you want? Nothing. You already took everything. Now I'm returning the favor. I hung up and walked out into the Chicago morning. The city looked different, sharper, clearer, more honest. My phone buzzed with interview requests from journalists, job offers from Viridian's competitors, messages from former colleagues finally free to speak. But I wasn't ready for any of that. First, I needed to watch them burn. The FBI raided Viridian's offices at noon. The scene played live on every business channel. Agents carrying boxes of documents. Richard in handcuffs trying to hide his face. Employees streaming out looking shocked or relieved or both. Ethan wasn't arrested immediately. He stood outside the building, talking to reporters, trying to spin himself as another victim, unaware of the corruption. But I'd saved special evidence just for him. Emails where he'd explicitly discussed stealing my code. Messages where he'd bragged about taking that bitch down. By sunset, he was in custody too. The healthcare platform he'd been shopping around revealed as stolen goods. His reputation destroyed more thoroughly than mine had ever been. I stood at North Avenue Beach, watching the sun paint Lake Michigan gold, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace, not happiness, not triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. Tomorrow would bring lawsuits, testimonies, the long grind of justice. But tonight, the monsters were caged, their victims freed, and the truth finally visible. My phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Ross? This is Amanda from the Wall Street Journal. We'd like to offer you a column about corporate accountability. The old Madeline would have jumped at the prestige. This Madeline had different priorities. Call me in a week, I said. I'm visiting my mother. The morning of the IPO should have been Richard's coronation. Instead, it became his public execution. Every major financial network carried it live, not the triumphant bell ringing at NYSE, but FBI agents marching through Viridian's gleaming lobby while employees watched from behind yellow tape. I orchestrated the timing perfectly. The evidence dropped in waves, each revelation calculated for maximum damage. First, the insider trading records at market open, then the client fraud documentation during the lunch hour news cycle. Finally, at 3 p.m. Eastern, just before market close, the crown jewel. Video recordings of Richard explicitly ordering the destruction of employees' careers, including mine. The stock price, which had been set to debut at $45 per share, never got the chance. The IPO was pulled 90 minutes before trading would have begun. Investors who'd committed billions were fleeing, their lawyers already filing lawsuits. Viridian's valuation collapsed from $8 billion to worthless in 6 hours. I watched from a coffee shop in Wicker Park, my laptop open to multiple news feeds. Every refresh brought new developments. Richard's assets frozen, board members resigning in disgrace. Ethan's LinkedIn profile deleted, by him or the company. I didn't know or care. The whistleblower hotline I'd helped establish received 200 calls that first day. Current employees finally felt safe to speak, their stories pouring out like water through a broken dam. The pattern was always the same. Brilliant people recruited with promises, then broken systematically when they showed independence or integrity. But Ethan wasn't done fighting. That evening, he went on CNN, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy conviction. I was manipulated by Madeline Ross, he claimed, looking directly into the camera. She seduced me, used me to access company systems, then destroyed my life when I refused to help her steal proprietary technology. The lies were so audacious I actually laughed, but some people believed him. The comment section split, half calling him out, half buying his performance. He was trying to muddy the waters, create reasonable doubt. So I released the final recording. I'd saved it for exactly this moment, audio from that Sunday night when he'd helped with my presentation. His voice, clear and smug. Don't worry, Maddie won't know what hit her. By the time she tries to run the demo, I'll have corrupted every backup. Richard promised me her position and a 40% raise. Maybe I'll keep her office chair as a trophy. The person he'd been talking to laughed. It was Richard's assistant, now testifying to the FBI. CNN pulled Ethan off air mid-interview when their producers verified the recording. The anchor apologized to viewers for platforming a confirmed liar. Ethan's lawyer abandoned him on live television, stating he'd been deceived by his client. Sarah Martinez called me that night, crying with relief and vindication. They offered me my job back, senior VP position, double the salary. I told them to fuck off. We laughed until we cried. Or maybe cried until we laughed. The trauma was real, wouldn't disappear with one day of justice, but the weight was lifting. David Park had already started his own company, funded by former Viridian clients, disgusted by the revelations. Come be my co-founder, he offered. We'll build what Viridian pretended to be. It was tempting, but I had one more move to make. The next morning, I filed my civil lawsuit. Not for money, though the damages would be substantial. I wanted something else. The rights to MedConnect AI, my stolen creation that Ethan had been shopping around. The legal argument was simple. It had been developed outside company time with my own resources, stolen through criminal conspiracy. Viridian couldn't defend what no longer existed. The company declared bankruptcy by Wednesday, its assets being carved up by creditors. Richard's personal fortune, built on others' broken dreams, would disappear into legal fees and settlements. But the sweetest moment came Thursday afternoon. Ethan, out on bail, tried to access his bank accounts. Frozen. His condo in River North seized as proceeds of crime. His Tesla, his watches, his entire carefully curated life, gone. He stood outside the federal building in the same suit he'd worn for 3 days, finally understanding what it felt like to lose everything. A reporter shoved a microphone in his face. Any comment on the allegations? He looked directly at the camera, at me wherever I was watching, and I saw it in his eyes. The recognition that he'd created his own destroyer, that every cruel action had been documented, every betrayal recorded, every lie preserved for this moment. Madeline Ross is, he started, then stopped. His lawyer's hand on his shoulder, warning him that anything he said would become evidence. He walked away in silence, disappearing into the crowd of downtown Chicago, another fallen executive in a city that had seen plenty. That night, I stood in my empty Pilsen studio, packing the war room into boxes, the charts, the timelines, the evidence that had consumed my life for months, all heading to the FBI as supplementary evidence. Tomorrow, I'd visit my mother, tell her the whole story, hold her hand through another chemo session. Next week, I'd start rebuilding, not the old Madeline who'd believed in corporate fairy tales, but someone harder, wiser, more dangerous. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you, IT department. I smiled, deleted the message, and destroyed the burner phone. Some allies were better left anonymous, their kindness preserved in shadow. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the skyline gold and crimson, somewhere in that maze of glass and steel. Richard sat in federal detention. Ethan was probably drunk in whatever cheap motel would take cash. Viridian's offices were empty, their lights finally dark, and I was free. 6 months later, I sat in a penthouse office overlooking Millennium Park. Not as CEO of someone else's company, I'd learned that lesson. As founder of my own healthcare technology firm, funded by investors who'd pulled out of Viridian and wanted to back something real. MedConnect AI launched nationally last week. My mother rang the opening bell at NASDAQ via video from her hospital room. Cancer-free for 3 months and counting. The platform was already saving lives, reducing medical errors by 37% in pilot hospitals. Every success felt like another nail in Viridian's coffin. Richard got 18 years federal prison. The judge called him a corporate predator who weaponized ambition and destroyed lives for sport. He'd aged 20 years in 6 months. His tan faded to prison gray, his swagger reduced to shuffling in chains. I attended every day of his trial, sitting in the front row where he couldn't avoid seeing me, never gloating, just witnessing. My presence was verdict enough. Ethan took a plea deal, 5 years, out in 3 with good behavior. But prison was the least of his punishments. His name had become tech industry shorthand for betrayal. Don't pull an Ethan meant don't backstab your colleagues. His Harvard MBA might as well have been toilet paper. Last I heard, his own family had disowned him after learning what he'd done to my mother's medical data for profit. The others found their own paths. Sarah Martinez became a corporate ethics consultant, teaching companies how not to become Viridian. David Park's startup just secured Series B funding. Jennifer Walsh returned from Singapore and started a legal firm specializing in protecting whistleblowers. We met monthly for dinner, survivors of the same war, bonded by scars that would never fully heal. But tonight wasn't about them. Tonight was about the view from this height, not just the physical elevation, but the psychological distance from that woman who'd sobbed on her bathroom floor, contemplating endings. A knock interrupted my thoughts. My assistant entered with an envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten. You think you've won, but I made you just like me. Ruthless, cold, alone. Look in the mirror and see what revenge has created. Enjoy your hollow victory. R. Richard's last attempt at psychological warfare from his federal cell. I read it twice, then fed it into the shredder, watching his words become confetti. He was wrong about one thing. I wasn't alone. My mother, David, Sarah, Jennifer, the 100 employees now building something meaningful instead of predatory. We were a different kind of family, forged in corporate fire but choosing to build rather than burn. But he was right about the other part. I had become ruthless. The woman who'd trusted too easily, who'd believed merit would be rewarded, who'd thought innovation could change the world through pure force of optimism. She was gone. In her place stood someone who understood power, who could wield it like a scalpel when necessary. The old Madeline would have been horrified. This Madeline understood it was evolution, not corruption. In an ecosystem full of predators, you evolved or you died. I'd evolved. My phone buzzed. A CNN alert, Viridian Dynamics Memorial Scholarship announced for business ethics students. The scholarship was mine, funded with the settlement money. Each year, 5 students would study corporate accountability, learning from Viridian's ashes how not to build a company. Their thesis requirement, design systems that protect employees from executive abuse. Richard would hate knowing his destruction funded the next generation of corporate reformers. Perfect? I poured myself a glass of wine, good wine now, not the desperate bottles from those dark months in Pilsen. The city sparkled below, all those lights representing dreams and ambitions, some noble, some corrupt, all burning with the same desperate intensity I'd once carried. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Competitors who'd try to steal my technology, employees who'd need protecting, investors who'd need managing. The game never ended, just changed players and stakes. But tonight, in this moment, I allowed myself one smile, not the bitter smile of revenge completed, but something else, the quiet satisfaction of survival transformed into success. They'd tried to bury me, forgetting I was a seed. My reflection in the window showed a stranger, shorter hair still dark from the dye, eyes harder than they'd once been. Posture that radiated danger instead of eagerness. Richard was right that revenge had changed me. He was wrong that it had hollowed me out. I raised my glass to the reflection, to the woman who'd crawled through hell and emerged carrying fire. They thought I was finished, I said to the empty office, to the city below, to everyone who'd laughed in that conference room. But really, I was just beginning. The lights of Chicago twinkled below, beautiful and merciless, a perfect mirror for what I'd become. Somewhere out there, another bright-eyed believer was probably working late on their revolutionary idea, trusting the wrong people, about to learn what corporate America really meant. Maybe they'd survive. Maybe they'd evolve. Maybe they'd become someone like me. I closed my eyes and smiled that cold, knowing smile. The monsters had lost, but in defeating them, I'd become something they never saw coming, a bigger monster, just one who hunted other monsters instead of innocents. And I was perfectly fine with that. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and redemption. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of justice served cold resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Madeline's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community special.